This talk is about whether the dark night of the soul that we experience is the same thing as going through a spiritual awakening. So everyone will define these spiritual experiences and transitions that we go through slightly differently. So there is no set way. So this is just based on my understanding of how things apparently seem to work quite often based on working with hundreds of people and my own journey. So I feel like the point of the dark night of the soul, if there was one, is really a way to start to guide us towards a spiritual awakening. So one way you could think of it is that we have got off our path, or we have sort of strayed away from working towards a spiritual awakening starting, and that is because we've got caught up in something. For me, it was a job that I was very identified with, but it could be a toxic relationship or a busy career, and something you sort of going in the wrong direction that would support your spiritual unfolding. And having a dark night of the soul seems to sweep everything away, take it away from you, and allow you to sort of have a clean slate to start to get on track, to start to work towards spiritual awakening starting. So just generally or overall speaking, I feel like that's the point of a dark night of the soul. For those people that don't experience a dark night of the soul but do go through a spiritual awakening, they often don't have this part of their life where they've wandered off course, where they've got caught up in something of the world. They've just from very early on become seekers and just kept on the spiritual path. And so, as you can see, there would be no reason for someone like that is pretty much on their way, on their path, to have some kind of upheaval, because they don't need it, because they're already doing what they need to do to keep progressing on their spiritual path. So for me, the dark night of the soul is there to get you to pay attention and to get you on your spiritual path, or to at least get you closer to it. It still may take years before awakening starts, but it's to get you heading in the right direction, we could say. And so I often find with dark nights, what happens is there is a stage before the event or events that cause the dark night to happen. There is some type of spiritual quest going on. It's not always the case, but typically I would say. So whether it's what happens when we die, or who am I, or it could be to do with awakening, it could be religion, it could be to do with psychic development or talking to angels, any range of spirituality, but just seeing that there's more out there in the world and some sort of spiritual or existential questioning going on. Usually that leads up to the dark night. And then the dark night itself tends to be one event or multiple events that are very challenging, life events, where you feel like everything's been sort of wiped away, or something very substantial has been wiped away. So this, of course, could be any big life event, such as divorce, such as bankruptcy, losing something substantial that you were very identified with, and that was a very big part of your life and really made up, sort of the core of your identity. And so something will happen to get that removed, and you will feel as though you're lost. And so this can feel like a type of depression. It can feel like despair. It can feel like you don't know who you are anymore. It's a real sense of sort of desperation and despair, and really not knowing what to do. And so there's this real sense of perhaps before you felt like you kind of had it together in some way, and now like you feel afterwards like a complete mess. You really like you're falling apart. There's a real sense of that. And you feel like something has changed, or that you're never going to be the same. There can be an intuitive sense of that. And so it can be a very significant and very painful event, or just a stage of life with multiple events and things unfolding that lead you to just really feel like you don't know who you are anymore. And it's painful, and it can last. It's totally different how long it can last for. It can be short to long to years. It's totally different for each person. But basically what it does is eventually or hopefully gets us to start to pay attention to what our life was like before, and maybe we don't want to keep doing things in the same way. Maybe the life that we created for ourselves before that shift happened was maybe not in alignment with what was best for us, or on best for our spiritual unfolding or maturity. And so for those of us that start to get interested more in spirituality and then leading into being interested in non-duality, however long that takes. So for me, it was about 6 years from the dark night that I had to actually really understanding and following awakening teachings. It did take quite a long time. I was interested in spirituality the whole time, but I wasn't interested in awakening or even know I was going through, well, what an awakening was, until about 6 or 7 years post the dark night that I experienced when I was 30. So it can take some time for sure. So some people are ready though, and with their dark night opening that they have, they can really have some identity drop away there. They really have an identity shift, and they're not the same person anymore. And they find awakening and really start to go towards remembering who they are. So for some people, that will be the turning point, and it will lead immediately to awakening. For other people like me, it's going to take some time. It leads to awakening, but it took the 6 years or so to find my way to an authentic awakening teacher and pathway. And so any variation of that, or for some people, they're not going to find their way to awakening. And that's just predetermined as to whether it's your time in that life or not. So not all dark nights seem to evolve into an awakening. But perhaps if we followed someone over decades, maybe 20, 30, 40 years from their dark night, we perhaps would see, if we did a study, that maybe everyone eventually in that life after their dark night finds their way to awakening, but perhaps it just takes a long time for some people. So we can't really know for sure whether a dark night equals that you're going to go through an awakening. It's possible, but if that is the case, it might just take a long, long time for someone to find their way to the awakening pathway. So the difference between just the dark night and actually going through an awakening is when you have identity dropping away. It's literally dissolving. And so it can be a little bit like a little crack of identity, or it can really be a big piece that drops away. And as that drops away, you question who you are then. If you're not that identity, not that person that did that job or was in that relationship or whatever it was, then who am I? And you really want to know. You really want to know the answer to who you are as more and more identity drops away. So the awakening is really about a loss of identity and then trying to realize who you are to live from that permanently. Where the dark night has a similar feel to it. You have lost who you thought you were at that time period has been taken away from you by life through some kind of loss, and you are lost in the way that you don't really know who you are. But I find that there's usually not an identity shift at this stage. It is sort of more of a burning out of energy that is going on, that has made up, that has got you to where you are at that period of your life, the egoic tendencies that have manifested and created that life that you found yourself in at that time. So something certainly feels like it depletes around the dark night of the soul and changes. But to say that identity is dropping away, I wouldn't necessarily say that is the case. So it's a little bit hard to point to exactly, because none of us really know how it works. I just more intuitively can sense that the dark night doesn't automatically mean that identity has actually shifted and been let go of, it can very much that you feel like you've put down something, but then you can start and recreate a new identity, a new job, a new life. And many people do. If you're able to do that and run with that, move on to the next thing, it means the dark night didn't really get you on track as far as your awakening pathway. And that's okay. No big deal. You can do it later in life or the next life or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But if you were not able to get on with life and you kept getting forced to look at who you are and existential questions and finding awakening teachings, then you can see that's quite different. And that's because it's time for you to go through the awakening process. So that's kind of the difference that I see. So the dark night can kind of lead into two different directions. One is towards awakening and one is towards creating new identities or just new ways of being in the world and just swapping out the old ones for the new. And if you're successful at that, then it is highly likely that you won't wake up. So you've got to basically fail at having identities and fail at until you get to the point where you don't want them anymore, so that you prioritize finding yourself and not being something in the world. And that's the difference between going through an awakening and just having a dark night and then just continuing on with your life. Some people report having multiple dark nights of the soul in their journey. I feel like this is to get their attention again and to get them on track again. And so perhaps they had the first dark night of the soul and that wasn't enough for them to find their way to awakening. And so they get another chance. So of course it's painful. They're experiencing some sort of loss and feelings of depression. And it's to see whether that time around they're ready at that age, with the events occurring at that time in their life, to go for it and actually find awakening. So some people get multiple chances through dark nights of the soul. Another way that people find awakening is through Kundalini, and that is the Kundalini energy within them starts to awaken just spontaneously. And this can happen in conjunction with a dark night of the soul. That was the case for me. So I was going through a dark night for maybe a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years or so. I didn't know it at the time, but upon reflection, at that time, I was also having Kundalini energy start, lots of shaking and tremoring happening. Again, I didn't know what it was at the time, but it was happening during the same time. So Kundalini can be activated, which is the energy component to awakening. And it can be a big deal for some people, or some people can barely notice it. It's quite different for each person. But this can happen in conjunction with the dark night of the soul. Or for some people, they can just have the Kundalini energy and not really so much have the dark night of the soul. This is where awakening is quite different and quite unique for each person. Although there's certain commonalities that occur, it really is quite a unique path. So some people just experience big Kundalini and then all their trauma starts to come up and they really need to start facing it and they just start going through an awakening. So that's quite an abrupt way to start the awakening process. Other people have the dark night and that starts awakening. Some people have both, which is going to get you pointed towards awakening. But again, it may not be overnight. It may take a year or years, like it did in my case, to actually really find your way to an authentic awakening path.